It began with a single light. Every night in the small coastal town of Greyhaven, one house on Harbor Street kept its porch lamp glowing long after midnight. People barely noticed it anymore. The town was quiet, slow, wrapped most nights in a thin curtain of fog drifting in from the sea. But on November 17th, at exactly 12:43 a.m., that light turned off. And the woman who lived there was never seen again. Her name was Elena Ward. She was 34 years old, a quiet freelance illustrator who spent her evenings sketching by the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. Neighbors would later say Elena was the kind of person who waved politely, smiled gently, and always seemed a little lost in thought. But on that foggy November night, someone or something interrupted the peaceful rhythm of Harbor Street. And the strangest part, no one heard a sound. Greyhaven at midnight. Greyhaven was the kind of town where everything slowed down after dark. The harbor boats rocked gently in the tide. The fog rolled through narrow streets like a drifting blanket. Streetlights glowed in soft orange halos, and most people were already asleep by midnight. But Elena Ward rarely slept early. She had a habit of working late into the night. Her studio sat in the front room of a small two-story house overlooking Harbor Street. From her desk, she could see the empty road, the quiet sidewalk, and the distant shimmer of the sea. That night, rain had started just after 11. A slow drizzle at first, then a steady whisper of water sliding along rooftops and gutters. Inside the house, Elena was finishing a sketch, a charcoal drawing of the old lighthouse at the edge of town. She paused for a moment, stretching her fingers, and that was when she noticed something strange. Across the street, standing under a flickering streetlight, someone was there, a silhouette, still, watching. The first strange detail. Elena leaned closer to the window, but the fog blurred everything. She could only make out the faint outline of a person, standing perfectly still beside the empty bus stop bench. Greyhaven's last bus stopped running hours earlier. There was no reason for anyone to be waiting there. Still, the figure didn't move, not even when the wind picked up. Elena watched for almost a minute. Then she shook her head slightly, assuming it was just someone walking home late. She returned to her drawing. Outside, the rain grew heavier, and the silhouette slowly faded back into the fog. But something unusual had already happened. At 12:18 a.m., Elena sent a short message to her friend Marcus Hale. The message read, "Is someone supposed to be outside my house?" Marcus never replied, because he was already asleep. The last known moments. The next activity on Elena's phone came 9 minutes later. Her music app started playing a quiet ambient playlist she often used while working. Soft piano, low gentle tones, almost like distant waves. At 12:31 a.m., Elena opened her front door. Police would later confirm this from the smart door sensor installed on the frame. Why she opened it, no one ever understood. There was no knock, no doorbell, no recorded sound, just the quiet click of the door unlocking, and then the door slowly opening into the rain. For 6 seconds, it remained open. Then it closed again. After that, there were no more digital traces of Elena Ward. But something else happened. At 12:43 a.m., the porch light turned off. The neighbor's observation. Across the street lived Mrs. Lorraine Hatcher, a retired librarian who often struggled with insomnia. That night she happened to be awake, wrapped in a blanket near her living room window. She later told investigators something peculiar. She had seen Elena earlier, moving around the house while drawing. But around 8:40 a.m., she noticed the porch light suddenly go dark. That alone wasn't unusual. But just before it went out, Mrs. Hatcher saw a shadow cross the porch. Not Alina. Someone taller. Someone standing very close to the door. When police asked if she saw the person leave, she paused, then quietly said something unsettling. No. The morning discovery. Alina's disappearance wasn't noticed until the next afternoon. Marcus Hale arrived at her house around 1 p.m. They had planned to meet for coffee. He knocked on the door. No answer. The house was silent. Marcus assumed Alina had stepped out until he noticed something odd. The porch light switch was still flipped on, but the bulb was burned out. That meant the light hadn't been turned off by Alina. It had simply died. Inside the house, everything appeared normal. Her sketchbook lay open on the desk, a charcoal drawing half finished. But the strangest thing sat near the window. Wet footprints, 3 of them, leading from the front door toward the living room, then stopping, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. The police investigation. Detectives from Greyhaven County arrived that evening. The rain had finally stopped, but the fog still clung to the streets. Inside Alina's home, they found no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. Her phone rested on the desk beside her drawing. Her coat still hung by the door, and her car remained parked outside. Everything suggested Alina had expected to return inside. But the footprints complicated things. They didn't match Alina's shoes, and they were larger. Possibly a man. Even stranger. There were no prints leaving the house, only entering. A quiet witness. 2 days later, another witness came forward. A night fisherman named Joel Ramirez. He had been driving along Harbor Road around 12:30 a.m. that same night. As he passed Harbor Street, he noticed a person walking slowly toward the Ward house. The figure wore a dark raincoat, hood up, face hidden. Joel thought nothing of it at the time, but one detail stuck with him. The person carried a lantern, an old-fashioned one, the kind sailors once used at sea. Joel remembered because the light flickered strangely through the fog. And for a brief moment, he thought he saw 2 shadows walking beside the lantern, even though there was only one person. The town begins to whisper. Greyhaven had always been quiet, but Alina's disappearance changed the mood of the town. People started locking doors earlier. Shops closed sooner. Some residents claimed they saw someone wandering Harbor Street late at night. Others reported the faint glow of a lantern near the old bus stop. Always after midnight. Always in the fog. Police searched the harbor, the nearby woods, even abandoned buildings along the coastline. But they found nothing. Weeks passed. Then months. Alina Ward became another unsolved case. Until something strange happened the following spring. The subtle twist around 30 minutes. In April, Alina's friend Marcus decided to pack up her belongings. The house had been sitting empty for nearly 5 months. Dust covered the furniture. The air smelled faintly of salt and old paper. Marcus carefully boxed Alina's sketchbooks. Most were filled with drawings of the town, the harbor, the lighthouse, quiet streets. But near the bottom of a drawer, he found a notebook he had never seen before. Inside were sketches of people. Dozens of them. Strangers standing in fog. Figures beneath streetlights. Silhouettes near the bus stop across the street. And on the very last page, a drawing dated 3 days before Alina disappeared. It showed a man holding a lantern, standing outside her house. Watching the window. Under the drawing were 4 words written in pencil. He comes every night. A disturbing detail. Marcus showed the sketch to police. Detectives immediately revisited the case. If Alina had been seeing someone outside her house repeatedly, why hadn't she reported it? Then investigators noticed something even stranger. The man in the drawing looked eerily similar to someone from Greyhaven's past. A lighthouse keeper named Thomas Vale. Thomas had lived in the town nearly 30 years earlier. He vanished in 1994 under mysterious circumstances. And the last place he was seen was Harbor Street, standing near the exact same bus stop, holding a lantern. The final quiet clue. The story might have ended there. Another strange coincidence in an unsolved case. But one final detail surfaced. 6 months after Alina disappeared, a delivery driver reported something unusual while passing Harbor Street around 1 a.m. Through the fog, he noticed a faint light moving near Alina's old house. A lantern. He slowed the van slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw someone sitting at the front window. A woman, head tilted slightly downward, as if she were sketching. But when the driver blinked, the window was empty again, and the lantern light slowly faded into the fog. The quiet ending. Today, Harbor Street looks exactly the same. The fog still rolls in from the sea. Rain still taps softly against the rooftops. And Alina Ward's house still stands at the corner. Empty, but every now and then, on particularly quiet nights, neighbors say they notice something unusual. A faint glow near the old bus stop, like the flicker of a lantern. And if you happen to look toward the front window of the house, just for a moment, you might think you see someone sitting at a desk, drawing, waiting, as the fog slowly drifts across Harbor Street, and the town of Greyhaven returns to silence. There is a road in the small town of Maple Hollow that people try not to drive after midnight. Not because of accidents, not because of crime, but because sometimes, when the fog drifts low across the pavement, someone appears standing beside the road. A quiet figure, still, watching passing cars. No one ever sees where the person comes from, and no one ever sees them leave. Most drivers assume it's just their imagination. But in October of 2018, something happened on Maple Hollow Road that the town has never been able to explain. Because on one foggy night, a woman named Clara Jennings drove down that road. And after that night, she was never seen again. The quiet town, Maple Hollow, was the kind of place where life moved slowly. The town had just one grocery store, one gas station, and a small diner that stayed open late for truck drivers passing through. After midnight, the streets became almost silent. Only the sound of distant wind through pine trees, and sometimes the quiet hum of a car passing along Maple Hollow Road. Clara Jennings lived alone in a small blue house near the edge of town. She was 41 years old, a freelance puzzle designer who spent most evenings creating crossword puzzles and logic games for online magazines. Friends described her as calm and thoughtful. She loved quiet hobbies, sketching small landscapes, reading mystery novels, taking long nighttime drives when the roads were empty. And on the night she disappeared, she had planned to do exactly that. The last drive. It was just after 11:50 p.m. when Clara left her house. Rain had started earlier that evening. A slow, steady drizzle that coated the roads with a reflective sheen. Streetlights glowed softly against the wet pavement. Clara placed a thermos of tea in the cup holder and turned on the radio. Soft instrumental music filled the car. She drove slowly through the quiet streets of Maple Hollow. Eventually turning onto the road many locals avoided after midnight. Maple Hollow Road. It curved gently through forested hills. Tall pine trees leaned toward the pavement. And on foggy nights like this one, the mist moved across the road like drifting smoke. Clara didn't mind the fog. In fact, she liked the atmosphere. It felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. But that night, something unusual waited along that road. The first strange detail. At 12:07 a.m., Clara slowed her car. Her headlights cut through a wall of fog ahead. And that was when she noticed someone standing near the roadside. A person, tall, wearing a long coat, standing beside an old wooden mailbox that belonged to an abandoned farmhouse nearby. Clara assumed it was a stranded driver, or someone walking home. She slowed the car slightly. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't react to the headlights. Just stood there, still, watching the road. Clara hesitated for a moment, then continued driving. But something about the figure bothered her, because as she passed, she noticed something strange. The person had no car nearby, and there were no houses within half a mile. The message. 5 minutes later, Clara sent a voice message to her sister Emily. The message was short, her voice calm but curious. Hey, quick question. Is there supposed to be someone walking on Maple Hollow Road tonight? Emily didn't hear the message until the next morning. By then, Clara was already missing. A flicker in the fog. At 12:14 a.m., a passing truck driver named Daniel Reed noticed something unusual. He was driving toward town when he saw Clara's silver sedan parked along the roadside. Its headlights were still on, the engine running, the driver's door slightly open. Daniel slowed his truck, but the fog made it difficult to see clearly. He didn't stop. Instead, he assumed the driver had stepped out briefly, maybe to check something on the road. But as he passed, Daniel noticed a second detail. Standing behind the car, barely visible through the fog, was another person, a silhouette, motionless, facing the vehicle. The empty car. Clara's car was discovered the next morning, parked exactly where Daniel had seen it. The headlights were off now, the engine silent. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared normal. Her thermos of tea sat in the cup holder. Her phone rested on the passenger seat. The radio still softly playing instrumental music. But Clara was gone, and there were no signs of struggle. Only something small that investigators didn't notice at first. A single wet footprint beside the open driver's door. It was Clara's, the abandoned farmhouse, just a few hundred meters away from where Clara's car had been found. Stood an old farmhouse. It had been empty for nearly 20 years. The windows were boarded. The front porch sagged slightly with age. Local teenagers sometimes dared each other to approach the property at night. But no one stayed long, because the place felt unsettling. Police searched the farmhouse during the investigation. Inside they found dust-covered floors, broken furniture, and decades of silence. But near the back door, they discovered something unexpected. Fresh footprints, 2 different sets, one smaller, one larger, both leading into the house. But strangely, none leading back out. The neighbor's story. About a week later, an elderly man named Walter Briggs contacted the police. Walter lived in a cabin about a mile from Maple Hollow Road. He rarely left his home, but he had been awake the night Clara disappeared, sitting near his window with a cup of coffee, listening to the rain. Walter told investigators he saw headlights stop along the road. Then he saw something else. A lantern, moving slowly through the fog. Someone carrying it, walking toward the abandoned farmhouse. Walter assumed it was a search team, until he realized something unsettling. This was hours before Clara's car had been discovered, and whoever carried the lantern was walking beside two shadows, even though he only saw one person. The investigation deepens. Police searched the woods surrounding the farmhouse. They checked nearby rivers. They questioned residents, but no trace of Clara Jennings was ever found. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, the case grew quiet, until a small detail surfaced that changed the direction of the investigation. Clara had been keeping a personal notebook. Inside were sketches of puzzles she was designing, but mixed between the pages were small drawings, simple pencil sketches of the same thing. A figure standing in fog, near a mailbox, along Maple Hollow Road. The drawings dated back nearly 3 months before she disappeared. And on one page, Clara had written something unusual. He stands there every night. The subtle twist, around 30 minutes. At first, detectives assumed Clara was imagining things. Maybe she had simply noticed the same late-night pedestrian more than once. But then they discovered something unsettling. Several other residents of Maple Hollow had quietly reported seeing the same figure over the years. Always along the same road. Always near the abandoned farmhouse. And always after midnight. But here was the strange part. The descriptions of the figure were identical. A tall person wearing a long coat, standing beside the road, perfectly still. And those descriptions dated back more than 25 years, long before Clara Jennings ever moved to Maple Hollow. An old missing person. While reviewing old police files, investigators found a case from 1993. A man named Harold Whitaker had vanished from Maple Hollow. He had been the last owner of the abandoned farmhouse. Witnesses said Harold was last seen walking along Maple Hollow Road late one night during heavy fog. And according to the file, he often carried an old lantern when walking home. The case was never solved. The final sighting, 2 months after Clara disappeared. A delivery driver reported something strange. While driving along Maple Hollow Road around 1:20 a.m., he noticed a car parked beside the road. Not Clara's, a different vehicle. But what caught his attention wasn't the car. It was the fog, and the faint glow of a lantern moving slowly toward the abandoned farmhouse. For a brief moment, his headlights illuminated the scene, and he saw 2 people walking side by side. One taller, one slightly shorter, both disappearing into the fog. The quiet ending. Today, Maple Hollow Road is still there. The trees still lean over the pavement. The fog still rolls across the hills on quiet nights. Most residents avoid the road after midnight. But occasionally, someone driving late through the mist will notice something unusual. A figure standing beside the roadside, still, watching, and sometimes, just before the fog closes in again, they might notice something else. A faint lantern light, moving slowly toward the abandoned farmhouse. 2 shadows walking together, where once there had only been one. And somewhere in the quiet darkness of Maple Hollow, the mystery of Clara Jennings remains unsolved. As the fog slowly drifts across the road, fog. If you walked through Ashford Lane after midnight, you would notice something strange about the old apartment building at the corner. Most of the windows were dark, except one, apartment 3B. For months, that window light turned on every night at exactly 2:41 a.m. The strange thing was, no one had lived in that apartment for weeks. At least, that's what the landlord believed. But on a rainy night in early November, a man named Ethan Cole disappeared. And the last place anyone ever saw him was inside apartment 3B. The quiet street, Ashford Lane, sat on the quiet edge of a small coastal town called Greyhaven. It was the kind of town where fog drifted in from the ocean after midnight. Streetlights glowed softly through the mist, and the sound of distant waves echoed faintly through empty streets. The apartment building at the corner was old. 4 floors, faded brick walls, wooden staircases that creaked softly with every step. Most of the tenants were long-time residents, retired couples, night shift workers, people who liked quiet places where not much ever happened. But in late October, something unusual began happening in apartment 3B. The missing tenant. Apartment 3B had belonged to Ethan Cole. He was 34 years old, a freelance audio engineer who spent most nights working on sound design projects. Neighbors often described him as polite but quiet. He enjoyed recording unusual sounds: rain on windows, wind through trees, even the soft hum of distant traffic late at night. His hobby was simple: capturing quiet moments, turning them into relaxing audio tracks. But one night, Ethan simply vanished. The last known evening, on November 12th, Ethan returned home around 11:30 p.m. Rain had begun falling steadily across Greyhaven. The sidewalks shimmered under streetlights. A neighbor named Marissa Doyle passed him in the hallway. She remembered the moment clearly. Ethan carried a small recording device in his hand, and he seemed excited about something. Before entering his apartment, he said something unusual. "The hallway sounds different tonight." Marissa laughed softly. She assumed he was joking, but Ethan simply smiled, then stepped inside apartment 3B. It was the last confirmed time anyone saw him. The first strange detail: at 2:41 a.m., the hallway security camera recorded something. The light inside apartment 3B suddenly turned on. A soft glow appeared beneath the door, but the camera never recorded Ethan leaving the apartment. And something else caught investigators' attention. The hallway microphone, installed with the security camera, picked up a faint sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving across the apartment floor. But according to phone records, Ethan's phone had already gone silent hours earlier. The morning discovery. The next morning, the building manager knocked on Ethan's door. Tenants had reported hearing something during the night. A soft humming sound, almost like someone playing a low audio tone through speakers. But when the manager entered the apartment, the place was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan's equipment sat on his desk, his laptop still open, a cup of tea half finished beside it. But Ethan himself was gone, and the window overlooking the foggy street below was slightly open. The recording. Investigators soon discovered something unusual on Ethan's laptop. An audio file recorded shortly before 2:30 a.m. The recording was labeled simply, "Hallway Midnight Test." At first, the recording seemed ordinary. Rain tapping against windows, the faint hum of electricity inside the building. But about 7 minutes into the recording, a second sound appeared. Footsteps, slow footsteps, walking down the hallway outside Ethan's apartment. The strange part: the security camera recorded no one there. The neighbor's observation. Marissa Doyle later remembered another detail. Around 2:40 a.m., she woke briefly during the night. She noticed something through her bedroom window, a faint light shining from apartment 3B. But what bothered her wasn't the light. It was the shadow moving across the curtains. Because for a moment, she thought she saw two shadows inside the apartment, even though Ethan lived alone. The strange mark. Police searching the apartment found something odd near the door. On the wooden floor was a faint mark, almost like a footprint, but not made from dirt. Instead, it looked like moisture, a damp footprint, and it faced toward the hallway door, as if someone had walked out. But again, the hallway camera never recorded anyone leaving. The landlord's story. The building landlord, Arthur Hale, shared something unsettling during questioning. Years earlier, before Ethan moved in, another tenant had lived in apartment 3B. A woman named Nora Blake. She had also disappeared. Her case had been ruled voluntary disappearance. But Arthur remembered something odd from that time. For weeks after Nora vanished, the light inside apartment 3B would occasionally turn on during the night, even though the apartment was empty. The subtle pattern. Investigators reviewed the building's electricity records. They discovered something strange. The power usage in apartment 3B increased slightly every night around 2:41 a.m., even during weeks when the apartment had been completely vacant. Someone or something was activating the lights. The twist: around 30 minutes. Months later, a sound engineer assisting the investigation analyzed Ethan's final recording more carefully. When he enhanced the background noise, a quiet voice became audible. It was extremely faint, almost blended into the hum of the building. But the voice repeated the same phrase, over and over. Soft, whispered, open the door. The chilling detail. The voice sounded almost identical to Ethan's own. The forgotten room. While reviewing old blueprints of the apartment building, investigators discovered something surprising. Behind the wall of apartment 3B, there was once a maintenance corridor, a narrow passage used decades earlier by electricians. Most residents never knew it existed, and the entrance to that corridor had once been located inside apartment 3B, behind a section of the wall near the closet. The wall had been sealed years ago during renovations, but when investigators checked it carefully, they noticed something unsettling. The paint along that section looked newer, as if someone had recently opened it. The hidden space. When the wall was finally opened, the narrow corridor behind it was revealed. Dust covered the floor. Old pipes ran along the ceiling, but there were footprints in the dust. Two sets, one leading deeper into the corridor, and one returning toward the apartment wall. Only one set matched Ethan's shoes. The other belonged to someone unknown. The final sound. The most disturbing discovery came weeks later. While examining Ethan's recording equipment again, investigators noticed a second audio file. This one had been recorded at 2:41 a.m., just seconds after the hallway lights turned on. The recording lasted only 12 seconds. At first there was silence, then the faint creak of a door opening, then footsteps. Two sets, walking slowly together, moving away into the hidden corridor behind the walls. The quiet ending. Today, apartment 3B remains empty. New tenants who move into the building rarely stay long. Not because anything dramatic happens, but because sometimes, in the quiet hours after midnight, a faint humming sound drifts through the walls, and occasionally, around 2:41 a.m., the hallway camera records something unusual. The light beneath apartment 3B's door slowly turning on, even though the apartment is still vacant. And somewhere inside the walls of the old building, two sets of footsteps seem to move slowly through the darkness. Soft, quiet, almost like someone walking beside a friend, disappearing deeper into the silent corridors of Greyhaven. Fog, have you ever wondered what happens on the last bus of the night after everyone else has gone home? In the quiet mountain town of Hollow Ridge, the final bus always left the station at 12:20 a.m. It followed the same lonely road every night, past empty fields, past silent houses, past long stretches of forest where fog settled low across the pavement. Most nights there were only one or two passengers, sometimes none at all. But on a rainy October night in 2019, a man named Lucas Mercer boarded that final bus, and somewhere along the dark road to Hollow Ridge, he simply disappeared. No one saw him leave. No one saw where he went. Yet when the bus reached its final stop, his seat was empty, and the window beside it was still fogged with the warmth of someone who had been sitting there only moments before. The town at midnight. Hollow Ridge was small enough that most residents knew each other by name. The town rested between forested hills, where fog rolled in almost every evening after sunset. By midnight the streets became quiet. Storefront lights turned off one by one. Rainwater trickled slowly along the sidewalks. Only the soft glow of streetlights remained. And at the edge of town sat the Greyline bus station. A single platform, one ticket booth, and a narrow road stretching into the dark hills beyond. The last bus of the night always arrived quietly, the engine humming low, the headlights glowing through the fog. And on the night Lucas Mercer boarded, there were only 3 passengers. The passenger, Lucas Mercer, was 29 years old, a graphic designer who worked remotely for a small marketing company. He had moved to Hollow Ridge 6 months earlier, hoping for a quieter lifestyle. Lucas loved calm places, rainy evenings, long walks through wooded trails, and photography. His camera was almost always with him. He especially enjoyed capturing nighttime photos of empty streets and misty landscapes. Earlier that evening, he had visited a small cafe near the bus station. The owner remembered him clearly. Lucas had been reviewing photographs on his laptop. One image in particular caught the owner's attention, a photo of the old railway bridge outside town, hidden in fog. Lucas had smiled and said quietly, "The fog makes everything look like a mystery." Then he packed his bag and headed toward the last bus. Boarding the bus, the driver that night was Martin Alvarez. He had driven the Hollow Ridge route for nearly 15 years. The routine rarely changed, but Martin later told investigators that Lucas seemed distracted. Not nervous, just thoughtful. As Lucas stepped onto the bus, he glanced briefly toward the road behind him, as if checking whether someone else might be coming. But the street was empty. Lucas paid his fare, walked halfway down the aisle, and sat beside a window near the back. The bus pulled away at 12:21 a.m., and the quiet journey began. The rain and the road. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Water streaked across the windows as the bus climbed the winding road through the hills. Inside, the cabin lights were dim. 2 passengers sat near the front, both wearing headphones. The only sound was the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Lucas sat quietly by the window, looking out into the fog, occasionally adjusting something on his camera. But about 15 minutes into the ride, something unusual happened. The first mini cliffhanger. The bus slowed suddenly. Martin noticed something ahead on the road, a faint shape standing near the shoulder. Through the fog, it looked like a person, standing still beside an old wooden sign. But as the bus approached, the figure stepped slowly backward into the mist and vanished. Martin assumed it was just someone walking home. But when he checked the rearview mirror, he noticed Lucas watching the road intensely, almost as if he had been expecting to see that figure. The next stop. The bus reached its first stop along the route, a small shelter near an empty parking lot. One passenger stepped off, leaving only Lucas and a middle-aged woman seated near the front. The bus doors closed, and the vehicle continued deeper into the hills. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened, until Martin heard a soft sound from the back of the bus. Not loud, just the faint click of a camera shutter. Lucas had taken a photograph through the fogged window. Martin didn't think much about it, but later that photo would become one of the strangest clues in the case. The photograph. When police examined Lucas's camera days later, they discovered the image taken on the bus. At first, it appeared to show only darkness and fog. But when investigators enhanced the photo, a shape appeared, standing beside the road. A tall figure, barely visible through the mist. And beside that figure, something even stranger. A second shadow, though no second person had been seen outside. The sudden stop. At 12:46 a.m., the bus made its second scheduled stop. The woman seated near the front exited. Now Lucas was the only passenger remaining. Martin closed the doors. The road ahead stretched through dense forest. Fog thickened between the trees. And for the next 10 minutes, the bus drove through complete silence. But when Martin glanced in the rearview mirror again, he noticed something odd. Lucas's seat looked empty. The empty seat. Martin assumed Lucas had moved closer to the front, perhaps to ask a question about the next stop. But when Martin slowed slightly and looked more carefully, the entire bus appeared empty. Lucas was gone. Yet the bus had not stopped. The doors had not opened, and there was no way anyone could have exited unnoticed. Martin pulled the bus to the roadside, rain tapping softly against the windshield. He walked slowly down the aisle. Lucas's bag still sat on the seat, his camera resting beside it. But Lucas himself had vanished. The investigation begins. Police initially suspected Lucas had left the bus earlier without the driver noticing. But security cameras at the final station showed no sign of him arriving. The road itself was surrounded by thick forest. Search teams spent days combing the area, but no footprints were found. No clothing, no signs of struggle. Only Lucas's camera and bag remained on the bus. And inside the camera, one final image. The final photograph. The last photo had been taken automatically, exactly 2 minutes after Martin noticed Lucas missing. The camera had captured the empty seat beside the window, but reflected faintly in the glass was something strange. A blurred outline, like someone standing directly beside the seat, watching the camera, even though the seat itself was empty. The subtle twist, around 30 minutes. Months later, investigators re-examined Lucas's photography archive. They discovered something unexpected. Lucas had taken several photos of the same roadside figure during the weeks before his disappearance. Always at night, always in fog, and always along the same bus route. But in the earliest photos, the figure stood alone. In the final images, there appeared to be two figures, one slightly taller than the other, as if someone had slowly joined the silent stranger over time. A forgotten story. An elderly resident of Hollow Ridge later shared something curious. Decades earlier, a hitchhiker had vanished along that same road. His name was Daniel Price. The last person to see him alive was a bus driver. He claimed Daniel had stepped off the bus into thick fog beside the railway bridge, and then disappeared, just like Lucas Mercer. The quiet ending. Today the last bus still leaves Hollow Ridge every night at 12:20 a.m. The route hasn't changed. The fog still rolls across the road, and the forest still stands silent along the hills. Drivers sometimes report seeing someone standing beside the roadside, watching the bus pass, a tall figure in the mist. But once, just once, a new driver reported seeing something different. Two figures standing together, side by side, quietly watching the road, as if waiting for the next passenger to join them. And somewhere along that lonely route through the fog, the mystery of Lucas Mercer remains unsolved. Fog. It was 2:17 in the morning when the streetlight on Maple Hollow Road began to flicker. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet pulse of yellow light, fading in and out through the thick November fog. The road itself was empty. No cars, no footsteps, only the distant sound of rain tapping softly on wet pavement. And yet, according to the police report filed later that morning, someone had been standing there, waiting. No one knew for how long. And by sunrise, that person was gone. But the strange part wasn't the disappearance. The strange part was that someone had seen him there, looking directly at a house that had been empty for nearly 15 years. A quiet town. The town of Greyhaven sat tucked between forests and old farmland, about 2 hours north of the nearest major city. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where the grocery store cashier knew everyone's name, and where the loudest sound at night was usually the wind moving through pine trees. The population was barely 3,000 people, which meant something unusual rarely happened. And when it did, everyone noticed, especially when someone disappeared. The man, his name was Daniel Mercer. He was 38 years old. Daniel worked as a night shift technician at the small Greyhaven power station just outside town. Quiet man, friendly but private. He enjoyed repairing old radios in his garage and had a habit of taking late evening walks after work. Neighbors described him as reliable, predictable, someone who liked routine. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., Daniel would drive home from work. Every morning at 5:42 a.m., he would stop at Wells Market to buy a coffee. Every morning at 5:50 a.m., he would arrive home. At least, that's how it had been for 7 years. Until the morning he never arrived. The last night, November 12th, started like any other night. Cold rain, low clouds, fog rolling slowly across the empty streets. Daniel finished his shift at 5:14 a.m. Security footage at the power station showed him leaving the building calmly. He carried his usual thermos and toolbox. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, but something strange happened just 3 minutes later. The parking lot camera, mounted above the exit gate, caught Daniel pausing beside his truck. He wasn't unlocking the door. He wasn't checking his phone. He was simply standing still, looking across the road, into the fog, as if he had seen something. The first mini cliffhanger. The footage showed Daniel standing there for nearly 20 seconds. Then he slowly turned his head, almost like he was following movement. But when investigators later reviewed the recording, there was nothing there. No car, no person, only fog drifting across the empty road. Then Daniel climbed into his truck and drove away. And that was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. The coffee that was never bought. At 5:42 a.m., Wells Market opened its doors. The cashier that morning was Linda Alvarez, who had worked there for nearly 10 years. She noticed something strange immediately. Daniel Mercer wasn't there. It may sound like a small detail, but in a town like Greyhaven, routines matter. And Daniel had never missed his coffee. Not once. Not in 7 years. Linda would later say something else felt strange that morning. The street outside the store felt unusually quiet, even for that hour, almost like the town itself was holding its breath. The truck, Daniel's pickup truck, was discovered later that afternoon. It was parked on Maple Hollow Road, about 2 miles from his house. The engine was off. The doors were unlocked. His keys were still inside. So was his thermos. But Daniel Mercer was gone. The strange detail. There was something else. Something the investigators didn't initially understand. In the thin layer of mud beside the truck, there were 2 sets of footprints. One clearly belonged to Daniel. Work boots, size 11. The other prints were smaller and barefoot. They led away from the truck, toward the old abandoned Carter house at the end of Maple Hollow Road. The Carter house had been empty for a long time. 15 years earlier, the Carter family had moved away after a fire damaged the interior. Since then, the house had sat quietly at the edge of town. Windows boarded, porch sagging, the yard overtaken by weeds. No one had any reason to go there. And yet, Daniel's footprint stopped at the front steps. The second mini cliffhanger. Investigators found something unusual on the porch. A single old radio. The kind with large knobs and metal antenna. The kind Daniel Mercer liked to repair. But no one in town recognized it. And when they turned it on, it produced only soft static. Except for one brief moment. Just once, a faint voice seemed to whisper through the speaker. Then the signal vanished. The neighbor across the road lived an elderly man named Harold Whitaker. Harold had lived in Greyhaven for more than 40 years. He told police something strange. Around 2:00 a.m., he had woken up after hearing a sound outside. Not loud, just the faint noise of someone walking slowly on gravel. When Harold looked through his window, he saw a man standing near the Carter house, watching it through the fog. At first, he thought it might be Daniel, but something about the way the man stood felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. The third mini cliffhanger. Harold said the figure wasn't alone. There was someone else standing on the porch, barefoot, but the fog was too thick to see their face. The investigation. For the next several days, Greyhaven was filled with police vehicles and search teams. The forest surrounding Maple Hollow Road was carefully combed. Dogs followed Daniel's scent, but it ended near the Carter house. Just stopped, like he had simply vanished into the air. No signs of struggle. No blood. No clothing. Nothing. A strange discovery. 3 days later, detectives found something unexpected inside Daniel Mercer's garage. A wooden workbench covered with old radios. Most were partially repaired, but one radio sat alone in the center. Different from the others. Older, heavier, and scratched with a small symbol on the back. A circle, with 3 lines inside. No one knew what it meant. The twist around 30 minutes. When investigators finally turned the radio on, they heard something chilling. A recording. Daniel's voice. Calm. Almost whispering. Someone has been answering. The recording continued. Daniel explained that for months he had been picking up a strange signal late at night while repairing radios. A signal that repeated the same message. Over and over and over. Come to Maple Hollow. At first he thought it was interference, but the signal began to change. It started responding to him, answering questions, calling his name. The final mini cliffhanger. The last line of the recording was quiet, almost hesitant. If anyone finds this, I think it wants me to come tonight. The recording ended there. The quiet ending. No one ever discovered what happened to Daniel Mercer. The Carter house was eventually demolished. The forest grew back over the search areas, and Greyhaven slowly returned to normal. But some residents still claim that on very foggy nights, around 2:17 am, an old radio signal can sometimes be heard on certain frequencies. A faint whisper, barely audible, calling out into the static, as if someone, somewhere, is still trying to find the way home. At 12:43 a.m., the porch light at the end of Hollow Creek Lane quietly turned on. No one touched the switch. No one walked up the steps. Yet the yellow light glowed steadily through the thick midnight fog. Across the street, a woman named Margaret Doyle happened to glance through her kitchen window. She would later say something strange about that moment. The light didn't just turn on. It turned on slowly, as if someone had been standing there, waiting for the darkness to lift. The house belonged to Evan Calloway, a quiet man who lived alone. And according to the town's records, Evan Calloway had already been missing for nearly 8 hours. A town wrapped in fog. The town of Blackridge Hollow was small. Not the kind of small that appeared on maps for tourists. The kind of small where most streets had no streetlights, where fog from the nearby river rolled through town after midnight. Only 2,800 people lived there. And after midnight, Blackridge Hollow became almost completely silent, except for the occasional barking dog, or the distant hum of a truck passing miles away on the highway, which meant when something unusual happened, people noticed. And that night, many people noticed the same strange thing. Lights turning on in Evan Calloway's house, even though no one had seen him return home. The man, Evan Calloway, was 41 years old. He worked as a postal sorter at the small regional mail facility just outside town. He lived quietly, kept to himself, but he had one habit that everyone nearby knew about. Every night after finishing work around 10:30 p.m., Evan would take a slow walk around the neighborhood, sometimes carrying an old camera. Photography was his hobby. He liked taking pictures of fog, empty streets, and old houses. Neighbors often joked that Evan saw beauty in places most people ignored. The last walk. On the night of October 18th, Evan left his house just after 11:05 p.m. A neighbor, Daniel Reeves, saw him passing beneath a street lamp. camera slung over his shoulder, hood pulled against the misty drizzle. Daniel remembered something odd about that moment. Evan had stopped in the middle of the street and looked down the empty road, not toward his usual walking route, but toward Hollow Creek Bridge, where the road disappeared into a heavy wall of fog. Then Evan kept walking, slowly, quietly, into the mist. Mini cliffhanger 1. That was the last time anyone clearly saw him. But 30 minutes later, someone else heard something strange. The sound near the bridge. At 11:37 p.m., a truck driver named Marcus Hill was passing through town. As he crossed Hollow Creek Bridge, he noticed a figure standing near the railing, barely visible through the fog. Marcus assumed it was someone enjoying the night air. But as his truck rolled past, he noticed something unsettling. The person wasn't moving, not even slightly, just standing there, facing the dark water below. And beside the figure sat a camera on the bridge railing. Mini cliffhanger 2. Marcus would later say something else. As his truck lights passed over the bridge, he thought he saw another shadow standing behind the first one. But when he looked in the mirror, the bridge was empty. The camera. The next morning, police found Evan's camera exactly where Marcus described, resting on the bridge railing, still turned on, still recording. The final photo taken by the camera showed something curious. A photograph of the foggy road behind Evan. But in the center of the image, barely visible, was a faint human shape standing in the distance. No one recognized the figure. Mini cliffhanger 3. But the strangest detail wasn't the shadow. It was the timestamp on the photograph. 12:43 a.m. The exact same time Evan's porch light mysteriously turned on back at his house. The porch light. Margaret Doyle, the neighbor across the street, insisted the house had been dark all night. Then suddenly, the porch light flickered on. Moments later, another light inside the house turned on. Then another, room by room, slowly, as if someone was walking through the house, turning lights on one by one. Mini cliffhanger 4. But when police arrived later that morning, every room inside the house was empty. A quiet investigation. Blackridge Hollow rarely dealt with disappearances. Police searched the woods surrounding Hollow Creek Bridge. Divers checked the slow river below. Search dogs followed Evan's scent along the road. But something strange happened. The dogs tracked Evan's scent halfway across the bridge, then stopped. Not because the trail ended, but because the scent seemed to circle in place, as if Evan had walked in a slow circle on the bridge, before vanishing. The neighbor's memory. 2 days later, investigators returned to speak again with Marcus Hill, the truck driver. During the second interview, Marcus remembered something new. Something small, but strange. When he passed the figure on the bridge, he heard a sound, very faint, like a soft radio transmission, static, and a quiet voice speaking slowly. Mini cliffhanger 5. But Marcus couldn't understand the words. Only one thing sounded clear. The voice said a name. Evan. Inside the house. When detectives searched Evan's house more carefully, they found something unexpected. In the spare bedroom, Evan had created a small photo development room. Hundreds of printed photos covered the walls. Foggy roads, empty parks, quiet houses. But one photo appeared repeatedly, over and over again. The same location, Hollow Creek Bridge, taken from different nights, different angles, different weather. but always the same bridge. Mini cliffhanger 6. And in several of those photographs, the same unidentified figure appeared standing near the railing. Always distant, always blurred, always watching. The journal. Inside Evan's desk drawer, police found a small notebook. Evan had been writing observation about his nightly walks. Most entries were simple notes about weather and lighting. But during the final weeks before he disappeared, his writing changed. One entry read, "Someone keeps appearing in the background of my photos." Another entry, "I don't remember seeing anyone there when I took the picture." Mini cliffhanger 7. The final entry was written the night Evan disappeared. It said only one sentence. "Tonight I will ask who they are." The subtle twist, 30-minute mark. Several days later, investigators discovered something unexpected about the photographs. The mysterious figure in the background was always positioned in exactly the same place, standing beside the same rusted railing post, which meant something unusual. The figure wasn't moving. Across dozens of photos taken on different nights, it stood in the exact same position, as if waiting, or perhaps as if someone had been standing there for years. Mini cliffhanger 8. But when police checked older town records, they discovered something unsettling. 10 years earlier, another man had disappeared from the same bridge. The older case. His name was Thomas Archer, a photographer, 39 years old. Last seen walking near Hollow Creek Bridge late at night. The investigation had gone cold, but one detail from the old report stood out. Thomas Archer's final photograph also showed a distant shadow on the bridge. The quiet ending. Months passed. Search efforts faded. The town slowly returned to its quiet routines. But Margaret Doyle still sometimes looks out her kitchen window late at night, especially when the fog rolls in. Because every once in a while, around 12:43 a.m., the porch light at Evan Calloway's empty house quietly turns on again. And if someone watches carefully, they might notice something standing at the far end of Hollow Creek Bridge, barely visible through the fog. Still, silent, waiting for someone else to walk by with a camera. At 1:17 a.m., a light quietly turned on inside apartment 307. No footsteps echoed in the hallway. No elevator doors opened. And according to the building's security log, no one had entered the apartment for nearly 6 hours. Yet the bedroom lamp glowed softly behind the curtains. Across the street, a night security guard named Louis Ortega noticed the light while making his routine patrol. He paused for a moment. Something about the scene felt slightly wrong. Because the tenant of apartment 307, Caroline Hayes, had been reported missing earlier that evening. And what Louis noticed next would quietly turn a routine missing person case into one of the strangest mysteries the small city of Greyhaven had ever seen. The light in apartment 307 didn't just turn on. It flickered once, then twice, almost like someone standing inside had just pulled the lamp chain. A quiet city at midnight. Greyhaven sat beside a cold northern lake. A quiet city of about 18,000 residents, where most streets became silent after midnight. Fog from the lake often drifted through the neighborhoods late at night. On damp evenings, the air carried the faint smell of wet pavement and pine trees. The apartment building where Caroline lived stood near the edge of town. 5 floors, 30 apartments, and a long hallway that always seemed just a little too quiet. Residents often joked the building felt like a place where sound simply disappeared. But on the night Caroline vanished, something else disappeared too. The woman, Caroline Hayes, was 34 years old. She worked as a freelance illustrator, designing book covers and digital artwork from home. Her friends described her as calm, thoughtful, and a little introverted. She loved three things: drawing late into the night, drinking chamomile tea, and taking quiet walks along the lake shore with her sketchbook. Caroline had lived in apartment 307 for almost 4 years. And during that time, she developed a small habit the neighbors noticed. Every night around midnight, Caroline would sit by the window sketching the fog rolling across the lake. The warm yellow glow of her desk lamp became a familiar sight in the building. But on the evening she disappeared, that light never turned on. The last known evening, on November 3rd, Caroline visited a small cafe 2 blocks from her building. The barista later recalled that she seemed normal, relaxed, calm. She ordered her usual chamomile tea, sat by the window, and spent about 20 minutes sketching something in a small notebook. Before leaving, she asked the barista a strange question, very casually, almost as if she were asking about the weather. She asked, "Has anyone ever mentioned strange lights in the apartments across the lake?" The barista didn't think much of it at the time, but that would later become the last recorded conversation Caroline ever had. Mini cliffhanger 1. Because when police later examined Caroline's sketchbook, they found the final page filled with drawings of a window across the lake. And inside that window, a faint shape standing in the darkness. Returning home, security cameras showed Caroline entering her apartment building at 9:42 p.m. She carried her sketchbook under one arm, her hair damp from the misty rain outside. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the 3rd floor, and disappeared down the hallway toward apartment 307. That was the last confirmed footage of her. But around 11:50 p.m. something strange happened. A neighbor named Harold Whitman heard quiet footsteps in the hallway. Slow footsteps, back and forth, as if someone were packing outside Caroline's door. Mini cliffhanger 2. Harold opened his door slightly to look, but the hallway was empty, except for a faint smell of wet concrete drifting through the air. The security guard. At 1:17 a.m., Louis Ortega spotted the light turning on inside apartment 307. From the street below, the glow appeared soft and steady. Louis assumed Caroline had simply returned home late. But something made him pause. He had checked the building earlier, and he clearly remembered something unusual. The apartment had been completely dark, and the hallway outside it had been empty. Mini cliffhanger 3. When Louis checked the building entrance log later that night, he discovered no one had entered the building after 10:00 p.m. Inside apartment 307, police entered Caroline's apartment the next morning. Everything looked calm, normal. Her tea mug still sat on the desk. Her sketchbook lay open beside it. But the room held a strange detail. The desk lamp that had turned on overnight was connected to a manual pull chain. Not a timer, not a smart switch, which meant someone had physically turned it on. Mini cliffhanger 4. Yet there were no fingerprints on the chain. Not even Caroline's. The sketches. Investigators carefully examined Caroline's drawings. Most pages showed quiet lake scenery, fog drifting over the water, old docks, abandoned boats. But during the final week before she vanished, her sketches changed. She began drawing the same building across the lake, an old, mostly empty apartment complex called Harbor View Towers. In several sketches, A single window appeared illuminated, and inside that window, a tall human silhouette stood perfectly still. Mini cliffhanger 5. When detectives visited Harbor View Towers, they discovered something unsettling. The apartment in Caroline's drawings had been vacant for nearly 7 years. The neighbor's story: a resident of Harbor View Towers remembered something curious. A retired teacher named Marjorie Keene told investigators she occasionally saw lights in the empty apartment, very late at night, usually during foggy weather. But whenever building management checked the unit, no one was inside. Mini cliffhanger 6. And according to building maintenance logs, the electricity to that apartment had been shut off years earlier. The subtle twist: 3 weeks into the investigation, detectives discovered something unexpected. One of Caroline's sketches wasn't drawn from across the lake. It was drawn from inside Harbor View Towers, from the exact apartment she had been sketching, which meant something strange. At some point before she disappeared, Caroline had visited the empty apartment herself. Mini cliffhanger 7. But security cameras at Harbor View Towers never recorded her entering the building. The final discovery: inside the vacant apartment, investigators found something resting on the dusty windowsill. Caroline's pencil, and beside it, a new sketch drawn directly on the wall. A simple drawing, just 2 figures standing near the window. One figure facing the lake, the other standing behind it, watching. The quiet ending. Months passed. Caroline Hayes was never found. Apartment 307 was eventually rented to someone new, but residents still mention something strange about the building on foggy nights. Sometimes, very late after midnight, a soft yellow light appears inside apartment 307, even when the tenant is away. And if someone looks closely from across the lake, they might notice something else: a faint silhouette standing quietly in the window of the long-abandoned apartment at Harbor View Towers. Still watching, still waiting, as fog drifts slowly across the water, and the city of Greyhaven falls back into silence. At 12:43 a.m., the last bus stopped at the quiet station in Hollow Creek. Rain tapped softly against the bus windows. The streets were almost empty. Only one passenger stepped off: a man named Daniel Mercer, age 41. The bus driver remembered him clearly. Daniel carried a small leather bag and wore a long dark coat damp from the rain. He stepped onto the sidewalk, paused, and looked down the road, almost as if he were expecting someone. The bus waited a moment, but no one came. The driver closed the doors and slowly pulled away. In the side mirror, Daniel Mercer was still standing there beneath the dim yellow streetlight, completely still, watching the empty road disappear into fog. And according to every record that exists, Daniel Mercer was never seen again after that moment. But the strange part of this story isn't just that he disappeared. It's what investigators discovered 3 nights later at that same bus stop. A small, quiet town. Hollow Creek was the kind of town where time seemed to move slowly. About 6,000 residents, a single main street, a quiet lake at the edge of town where fog often drifted across the water after midnight. On rainy nights, the entire town smelled faintly of wet wood and damp leaves. Streetlights glowed softly through the mist. And after midnight, the town usually became completely silent, except for the last bus that arrived every night just before 1 in the morning. The man who disappeared, Daniel Mercer, had moved to Hollow Creek about 6 months earlier. He worked remotely as a historical researcher, spending most of his time reading old town records and writing quiet articles for academic journals. Neighbors described him as polite but quiet. He enjoyed long evening walks, and he had one unusual hobby. Daniel loved collecting old photographs of forgotten towns and buildings. Sometimes he spent hours studying them, looking closely at tiny details hidden in the background. Mini cliffhanger 1. 1 week before he disappeared, Daniel visited the town library and asked the librarian an odd question. He asked, "Has anyone ever talked about the old bus stop that used to stand near the lake?" The librarian thought for a moment, because Hollow Creek only had one bus stop now. But decades ago, there had been another, one that had been quietly removed after a strange incident in the 1970s. The rainy night. On the night Daniel disappeared, the weather was calm but rainy. Security cameras confirmed he boarded the late bus in the nearby city. He seemed normal, relaxed. He even chatted briefly with the driver about the rain. But during the ride back to Hollow Creek, something changed. The driver later recalled Daniel staring out the window for nearly 20 minutes, focused on something in the darkness outside, as if he recognized something along the road. Mini cliffhanger 2. When the bus finally reached Hollow Creek, Daniel was already standing by the door before it stopped. The last sighting. When Daniel stepped off the bus at 12:43 a.m., the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The streetlights glowed faintly through thick fog rolling in from the lake. The bus driver remembered Daniel turning slowly toward the lake road. Then he noticed something unusual. Daniel seemed to tilt his head slightly, as if listening to something distant. But the street was silent. No footsteps. No cars. Nothing but the soft sound of rain on pavement. Mini cliffhanger 3. Except, according to the driver, Daniel suddenly smiled, as if someone had just called his name. The discovery. 3 days later, a town maintenance worker named Tom Caldwell found something strange near the bus stop. Footprints. A single set, leading away from the sidewalk, toward the old lake road. But the footprints didn't look recent. The edges were softened by rain, as if they had been there longer than 3 days. Mini cliffhanger 4. And even stranger. The footprints suddenly stopped halfway down the road, as if Daniel Mercer had simply vanished mid-step. The old bus stop. Detectives investigating the case remembered Daniel's earlier question at the library, so they began researching the old bus stop from the 1970s. It once stood about half a mile down the lake road, a small wooden shelter where buses used to stop before the town changed its route. But the stop had been removed after a strange story spread through the town. Several residents claimed they had seen someone waiting there late at night. Someone who never boarded any bus. Someone who simply stood inside the shelter, watching the road. Mini cliffhanger 5. And according to old police records, one man who approached the shelter in 1978 also disappeared, without leaving a trace. Daniel's research. When investigators searched Daniel's apartment, they found dozens of old photographs spread across his desk. Many of them showed the same location, near the lake road. But something strange appeared in several images. In the background of at least 3 photographs, there was a faint shape. A person standing near the old bus stop, looking toward the road. Mini cliffhanger 6. But the photographs were taken decades apart, and the silhouette looked exactly the same in every picture. The subtle twist, around 30 minutes. While examining Daniel's laptop, detectives discovered the final article he had been writing. The article suggested a strange theory. Daniel believed the old bus stop had once stood on the exact location of a much older road, one that appeared in maps from the 1800s but later vanished. A road that local folklore sometimes referred to as the Waiting Road. According to the stories, travelers sometimes saw a stranger standing beside the road late at night, a silent figure who seemed to be waiting for a bus that never arrived. Mini Cliffhanger 7, and Daniel's final note in the document said something chilling. He wrote, "I think the stories might be wrong. The figure isn't waiting for the bus. It's waiting for someone else." The final detail: police eventually searched the lake road one last time, late at night, in thick fog, and one detective noticed something unusual near the roadside. An old wooden sign partially buried in the grass, almost completely rotted away. But faint letters were still visible, just enough to read the words, "Bus stop." The quiet ending: Daniel Mercer was never found, but bus drivers in Hollow Creek sometimes mention something unusual. On rainy nights, when the fog rolls in from the lake, they occasionally see someone standing near the old road, a quiet figure beneath the trees, watching the bus pass slowly by. And for just a moment, it almost looks like the man is carrying a small leather bag, as if he's been waiting there for a very long time, waiting for the next bus that might finally stop. At 2:17 a.m. in the quiet town of Pine Hollow, a single light turned on inside an abandoned house. No one had lived there for nearly 12 years. The windows were dusty. The wooden porch sagged slightly under the weight of time and rain. Yet that night, a warm yellow glow slowly appeared behind the second-floor window. Across the street, an elderly neighbor named Margaret Doyle happened to be awake. She noticed the light immediately, because she had looked at that empty house almost every night for years, and she knew something about it that very few people remembered. The last person who had lived there had disappeared without explanation. A man named Elliot Crane, age 37. And what made the situation even stranger was that the police had locked the house after Elliot vanished. No one had been inside since. At least, that's what everyone believed. A town surrounded by fog, Pine Hollow sat in a quiet valley surrounded by tall cedar trees. On rainy nights, fog drifted slowly through the streets like a pale river moving between the houses. Streetlights glowed softly through the mist, and after midnight, the town became almost completely silent. The only sounds were distant wind through the trees, and the occasional hum of a passing car far away on the highway. Most people in Pine Hollow slept deeply at night, but Margaret Doyle had always been a light sleeper. So when she saw that window light suddenly appear, she knew something was wrong. The man who lived there, years earlier, the abandoned house belonged to Elliot Crane. Elliot worked as a cartographer, a map maker who studied old land surveys and historical maps. He had moved to Pine Hollow because the town archives contained hundreds of old regional maps dating back more than a century. People described Elliot as quiet and thoughtful. He often spent evenings walking slowly through town, studying buildings and sketching small maps in a leather notebook. But he had one unusual habit. Every night around midnight, Elliot would sit by the upstairs window of his house and stare down the empty street. For long periods of time, sometimes for hours. Mini Cliffhanger 1. One neighbor eventually asked him why. Elliot smiled gently and replied, "Because sometimes roads don't stay where they're supposed to." No one knew exactly what he meant. But a week later, Elliot Crane disappeared. The night he vanished, according to police reports, Elliot was last seen walking home from the town archive during a foggy evening in early October. He carried his usual leather notebook and a folded map. The librarian remembered something unusual about his mood. He seemed excited, almost nervous. Before leaving, Elliot asked one final question. He said, "Has anyone ever mapped the road that used to run behind Cedar Hill?" The librarian searched the records, but there was no road listed there, at least not on any modern maps. Mini cliffhanger too. But when Elliot left the archive that night, he wasn't walking toward his house. He was walking toward Cedar Hill. The search. When Elliot failed to appear for work the next morning, police searched his home. Everything looked normal. His coat hung by the door. A cup of tea sat untouched on the kitchen counter. But one thing was missing. His leather notebook. The one he always carried. Mini cliffhanger 3. And inside the study, detectives found an old map spread across Elliot's desk. But something about the map was strange. A new road had been drawn on it in pencil. A road that didn't exist on any official survey. And the road ended directly behind Cedar Hill. A forgotten path. Local historians later confirmed something unusual. More than 120 years earlier, a narrow carriage road had indeed existed behind Cedar Hill. But it disappeared from records sometime around 1902. No explanation. No documentation. It simply vanished from maps, as if someone had quietly erased it. Mini cliffhanger 4. But Elliot Crane believed the road might still exist, hidden somewhere in the forest. Margaret's observation. For 12 years after Elliot vanished, the house remained empty, until the night Margaret Doyle saw the light turn on upstairs. At first she thought she might be mistaken, perhaps a reflection from a passing car. But the light remained steady, soft, warm, almost like someone had just switched on a lamp. Margaret watched the window carefully, and after several minutes, she noticed something else. Mini cliffhanger 5. A shadow moved slowly across the curtain. Someone was inside the house. The police returned. Margaret called the local police station. 2 officers arrived quietly and approached the abandoned home. The front door was still sealed, with the original police lock from years earlier. Untouched. No signs of entry. But when they looked up at the second-floor window, the light was definitely on. Mini cliffhanger 6. Yet when they finally forced the door open and searched the house, the upstairs room was completely empty, and the light was off again. The notebook appears. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A young boy fishing near Cedar Hill discovered an old leather notebook lying beside a fallen tree. Inside were dozens of hand-drawn maps, all created by Elliot Crane. Each map showed a slightly different version of the forest behind Cedar Hill. And in every version, Elliot had drawn the same mysterious road. Mini cliffhanger 7. But the final page of the notebook contained something unusual. Not a map, just a short handwritten sentence. The subtle twist, around 30 minutes. The sentence read, "I finally found the road tonight." Below it, Elliot had written one final note. If the map is correct, the road only appears when the fog is thick enough. Investigators returned to Cedar Hill during a heavy fog a few nights later. And while walking through the trees, one officer noticed something odd beneath the mist. A narrow path, barely visible, almost like an old road slowly reappearing beneath the forest floor. The quiet discovery. The path didn't appear on any modern maps, but it seemed to lead deeper into the woods, farther than anyone expected. After about half a mile, the officers found something lying beside the path. A small metal object, rusty but recognizable. It was an old street sign. The letters were faded, but still readable. The sign said, Crane Road. The haunting ending. Elliot Crane was never found. But people in Pine Hollow still talk about strange things that happen on foggy nights. Some drivers claim that when the mist becomes thick enough, their GPS briefly shows a road behind Cedar Hill. A road that isn't supposed to exist. And occasionally, late at night, a faint light appears deep in the forest, almost like a lantern, moving slowly along a hidden road, as if someone is still walking there quietly, mapping a path that the rest of the world has forgotten. At 1:43 a.m., during a quiet autumn night, the porch light at 18 Alder Street suddenly turned on. That alone wouldn't have been strange, except the house had been empty for nearly 7 years. Rain fell softly over the small town of Grayford, tapping gently against rooftops and empty sidewalks. A thin layer of fog drifted slowly along the road. Across the street, a bakery owner named Thomas Reed was locking up his shop when he noticed the warm yellow glow on the porch. He paused, because he remembered something very clearly. The last person who lived at 18 Alder Street had disappeared one foggy night. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She was 34 years old, and no one had ever figured out what happened to her. Yet now, in the quiet rain, the porch light of her empty house had turned on again. The town of Grayford. Grayford was the kind of town where nights felt longer than usual. Tall maple trees lined the streets, their branches stretching quietly over the sidewalks. When fog rolled in from the nearby river, the entire town seemed to fade into a soft gray haze. Most homes shut their lights off by midnight. Only a few street lamps remained glowing, and the faint hum of distant traffic echoed far away beyond the hills. Clara Whitmore had moved to Grayford 2 years before she vanished. She worked remotely as a historical researcher, studying old newspaper archives and forgotten local stories. People described her as thoughtful and curious. She enjoyed quiet hobbies, long evening walks, reading old town records, and collecting unusual historical maps. Mini cliffhanger 1. But shortly before Clara disappeared, she had begun asking neighbors a strange question. She asked them if they had ever heard of something called the Alder Street Incident. No one had. Clara's quiet routine. Clara lived alone in the small white house on Alder Street. Every evening she followed the same peaceful routine. She brewed tea, opened her laptop, and sorted through old newspaper articles from Grayford's early history. Sometimes she would sit on the front porch and listen to the rain while writing notes in a leather journal. Neighbors often saw her porch light glowing late into the night. But about a month before she vanished, her routine changed slightly. She began taking late-night walks, always toward the edge of town, always toward the river road. Mini cliffhanger 2. And one night, a neighbor noticed something unusual. Clara wasn't walking alone. It looked like she was following someone, a man in the fog. The neighbor only saw the figure briefly. Tall, wearing a dark coat, walking slowly ahead of Clara through the mist. But when police later questioned residents, no one else reported seeing that man, and Clara never mentioned him to anyone. The discovery in the archives. A week before Clara vanished, she visited the Grayford Historical Archive. The librarian later remembered the exact conversation. Clara looked excited, almost restless. She had found something unusual in an old newspaper from 1962. The article described a strange event near Alder Street. A man named David Mercer had disappeared after claiming that he discovered a road that shouldn't exist. The article was short, almost strangely incomplete. It ended with a single sentence. Police closed the investigation after no physical evidence was found. Mini cliffhanger 3. But Clara noticed something no one else had. The article mentioned a streetlight that turned on by itself the night Mercer vanished. The exact same streetlight that stood directly in front of Clara's house. The night Clara vanished. On the evening of October 14th, heavy fog rolled through Grayford. The streets became quiet earlier than usual. Around 11:50 p.m., Clara sent a short message to her friend. It read, "I think I found the road." Her friend asked what she meant, but Clara never replied. Mini cliffhanger 4. The next morning, Clara Whitmore was gone. The investigation. Police searched her home carefully. Nothing looked disturbed. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table. A mug of tea had grown cold beside it. But one thing was missing: Clara's leather journal. And her coat. The map on the wall. Investigators discovered something interesting in her study. Clara had pinned a large map of Grayford to the wall. Dozens of red marks circled specific areas around town. But one location had been marked repeatedly: a narrow wooded trail behind Alder Street. A trail that no longer appeared on modern maps. Mini cliffhanger 5. But older maps from the 1950s showed something surprising. There had once been a small service road running through that exact area. The road disappeared from records sometime in the late 1960s, just a few years after David Mercer vanished. The quiet trail. Police searched the wooded area behind Alder Street. The fog was thick that morning. Branches dripped slowly with rain. The forest floor was soft with damp leaves. After about 20 minutes of walking, an officer noticed something unusual. A faint path beneath the fog, barely visible, almost like an old road slowly returning. Mini cliffhanger 6. But the path suddenly stopped, as if it simply faded back into the forest. Years of silence. After months of searching, the investigation slowed. No witnesses. No physical evidence. Clara Whitmore's disappearance slowly became another quiet mystery in Grayford's history. Eventually, the house on Alder Street was abandoned, and the porch light remained off. For 7 long years. The light returns, until the night Thomas Reed saw it glowing again. Standing in the rain outside his bakery, he watched the porch carefully. The light remained steady, warm, gentle, almost welcoming. Then something else caught his attention. Mini cliffhanger 7. The front door slowly opened. The police arrived. Police arrived within minutes. They approached the house cautiously, but the door was locked from the inside. When they entered the house, every room was empty. The porch light switch had not been touched, and yet the light was still glowing. The subtle twist, 30-minute mark. While searching the upstairs bedroom, officers noticed something strange on the wall. Behind an old bookshelf, Clara had written a series of notes in pencil. Dates, locations, observations, and one final message. It read, "The road appears only when the fog reaches the streetlights." Below it, another line was written, softer, almost hesitant. "Someone else has been walking there for years." The final discovery. A week later, a maintenance worker repairing the streetlight outside Clara's house made a small discovery. Hidden in the base of the pole was a folded piece of paper. Inside was a page torn from Clara's journal. The writing was calm, neat, careful. It said, "If anyone finds this, please don't follow the road." Then one final sentence appeared beneath it. "I think the man from 1962 is still walking there." The quiet ending. Even today, people in Grayford occasionally notice something strange on foggy nights. The streetlight on Alder Street sometimes turns on, even when the power is out, and drivers passing through town have reported seeing a faint path behind the houses, a narrow road leading quietly into the trees. Sometimes, very late at night, two distant figures can be seen walking slowly along that road, one wearing an old dark coat, and the other carrying a small leather journal, both disappearing gradually into the fog, as if they are still searching for something, or perhaps mapping a road that the rest of the world was never meant to see.